That one. So huge thanks to you guys, and thanks to everybody with your continuing viewership here of Baltimore Comic-Con Live. We're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling for all of you Star Wars fans. For the next hour, we're going to be doing a deep dive. We've got some amazing guests here to talk about, a galaxy far, far away, here to host and moderate our Star Wars panel, a guy who knows a couple things about Star Wars. I want to welcome to Baltimore Comic-Con, Mr. Alden Diaz. How you doing, man?
Hello. And just to be clear, I know a couple things, and they're only about Star Wars. That's all I know.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. You come so highly. Big thanks to Ken Knapsack for putting us in touch with you. The wonderful Ken Knapsack. I know you want to have as much of this hour as you possibly can, so I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose, man. Have fun. We're going to be watching from the background. Have a good time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with just a phenomenal Jedi Council, a phenomenal crew of guests here. We've got an entire panel. We got 4 amazing people that are going to be joining us to talk about the world of Star Wars comics. And so we've got Katie Cook, who you know from such books as Creatures Big and Small, ABC 3PO, Search Your Feelings, and so many more, adding so much life to the Star Wars world with the amazing visuals that just bring us so much joy. We have Greg Pak, who is currently on Darth Vader, has also done the Age of Rebellion comics, so really injecting that original trilogy flavor. Michael Moreci on Star Wars Adventures, which has now transitioned into the world of the sequels and that Last Jedi Rise of Skywalker era. And then also Charles Soule, who has done Lando, he's done Vader, Obi, and Anakin, and he is currently on the Star Wars book as well as gearing up for High Republic. So how's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah. Everyone all right? Everyone. I know in the chat we were just talking about how it's 2020, so we're all like, I'm existing.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hanging in there is what I always say. Hanging in there.
Yeah, hanging in there. So I'm curious. Like I was saying before, this crew right here, we've got so many different Star Wars backgrounds, so many different Star Wars stories coming out of your minds. Is this a Jedi Council or is this like a scoundrel crew? Just looking around at the people that are with us.
I would say it's more like one of the back tables at the cantina.
These are just the muftacks and the hammerheads of the Star Wars galaxy, but they let you guys create it. So really, this is the most flavorful Star Wars story, I think, that we're experiencing right here. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. I agree. So I want to start by asking sort of just about the tone of this year, of everything going on, how weird it's been. Many of your projects were thrown around in terms of scheduling and release and timeline and all that stuff. But how do you sort of stay creative? How do you stay invested? Do you find yourself diving more into the work because of being home, or do you sort of have to find that balance of separation too?
Well, I think most of us, we're all freelancers, right? So probably most of us work at home to begin with. So in some weird ways, that transition on the work front less stressful. Was probably less stressful for some of us than it was for so many people. Just because I'm in my undisclosed location the same way I always am with my fish. But I mean, yes, the whole world is in chaos all the time, and it's a stressful time to be doing any kind of work. I don't know. I was thinking about this a while ago. It's any any page anybody writes these days is a miracle, and I mean, I'm not even kidding. It really is, and I mean, any productive work anybody does is a miracle. And I'm full of admiration for anybody who manages it. I to your specific question, I think that having stuff to do, in terms of having deadlines has been helpful to me. Like having work, having stories to tell. I think I've been fortunate in that I've been fortunate with Star Wars with this Vader book in a number of ways, because I'm just we're really grateful that it had it was not put on pause. Folks have been incredibly supportive. The first issue had just come out before the lockdown happened, but the book has been really excited for it, and that's that's incredibly gratifying. Hugely grateful for. And I'll be honest. I'm grateful to be working on a sci-fi story that is not set in real life. I mean, or not set in our world. I don't know. I haven't had to deal with the challenge of writing a current story that takes place in the outside our window. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had to grapple with this whole question of incorporating directly incorporating current event story. I don't think I'm ready for that. That
Right.
don't feel like it feels like stuff is unfolding, and I wouldn't. Like that's a big responsibility to take on to tell that kind of story. Not that it shouldn't be done, and not that people aren't doing that brilliantly, but it has been nice to have a story that, while always relevant, because questions of of morality and of definition and responsibility of other and struggling with darkness within, in the case of Vader, those are always relevant. So that's it.
And
Hey,
who
Greg-
better to guide us through these times than Darth Vader?
Yeah, exactly. Right. He wears a mask. He is incredibly responsible.
Greg, I just wanted to jump in here real quick as a technical reason. If you wouldn't mind logging back in, there's just a little bit of a strange echoey thing happening with your mic, and I hate to derail the conversation. Just maybe log out and then just jiggle your connection and log back in.
No problem.
Cool. Sorry, as you were.
Yeah, no worries. And so for Michael and Katie, I'm curious, building off of sort of what Greg said, is there a quality you think about, particularly your Star Wars work? And I know, like, with Adventures and with the books that you've worked on, Katie, there's also that emphasis on all ages. Mm-hmm. Is there something about Star Wars that you think is especially poignant for these times? Whereas, George in the 70s, it was the rebellion, the distrust, and the wanting to break free of the man and all that. Whereas now, do you think that there's like a certain comfort for the stuff that you guys are doing in 2020?
It is. There's a level of escapism in Star Wars that we need during these times. This is actually the point in time that I basically forced it upon my 9-year-old, because I was like, all right, you're stuck at home. I'm stuck at home. We're going to watch all this now.
Yeah.
And thankfully, she's really loving it. And I mean, it's even a point of escapism for me working on the books. I think basically since the lockdown started in March, I illustrated the Star Wars Galactic Storybook. I wrote and draw Star Wars Monsters, Ooze, and Slime, which is a book that is about like all the grossest facts of the Star Wars universe. I did the Empire Strikes Back anthology project, and I have written 2 issues of Star Wars Adventures for IDW. So for me, it's like, thank goodness Star Wars exists, because I mean, I have my own project as well that I work on, but I have needed to escape to the galaxy far, far away every once in a while. So this has been great for me, and I know so many people that have started introducing their kids to Star Wars during this time when basically they don't have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about for you, Michael, taking over Adventures right now, where you're also dealing with the newest characters, with the characters that kids are looking up to, from 2015 to now, where, in 10 years, they'll be saying, but it was the sequels that were really the best ones. You have Rey, you have Finn, Poe. What do those characters mean to you right now in a time where things do seem so uncertain, and where kids can really use, a Jedi like Rey, a hero like Finn?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think obviously a lot of things have changed in the last however many months in so many ways, creatively, professionally, things have changed. But I think one of the things that has remained true, at least for me, I forget exactly when I first started writing Star Wars stories. I'm afraid it's at least a year prior to, I think it was like late 2018 or something like that. But the one thing that stayed the same for me is the importance of writing, doing my best by Star Wars. Like every Star Wars story that I want to tell, I want it to be true to what Star Wars is. And I think that remains consistent from the prequels, the original trilogy sequels to animated series, whatever. There's a certain heart and spirit that exists throughout all of Star Wars. And when you talk about the sequel characters, whom I adore, I think it remains consistent to that as well, and trying to maintain that level of heart and soul in Rey, in Finn, in Poe, in Rose, and in whomever, in BB-8, you know. And as I'm looking at those characters, you know, I see them a lot through. I'm a dad. I have 2 kids, and I see them a lot through my kids' eyes. And being able to explore those relationships as the way that they understand that has been beneficial to me to understand how they see it. I mean, they're both huge Rey fans, which is lovely, and also getting this sense of the importance that she has specifically to them. Has really shown me how, again, that Star Wars spirit transcends, you know, different prequel, you know, eras of the series itself, but also eras of our world, from my generation to their generation and beyond. And working in that context has been it's been nice. It's been meaningful to me, and it's been nice to stay focused on that and missed everything else.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we welcome back. Charles is here. Charles, I was just talking to everybody sort of about this year, about the characters, about sort of their mentality and what Star Wars can bring right now. You've tackled so many different corners, characters with so many different mentalities. I mean, I think that if you put Lando Calrissian and Vader and even Avar Kriss and upcoming Star Wars characters all in a room together, it might be very combustible. So I'm curious for everybody here, but starting with you, how is it, you know, challenging but also freeing to get into the heads of these characters, some of which you knew as a little boy? Is that intimidating for you?
I think it would be just completely untrue to say that it's not hugely intimidating to write these characters, because they're you know, Darth Vader is known around the world. Like, that icon, that silhouette, that character is maybe not every person on Earth knows who Darth Vader is, but a lot of them do. And they know his story, and it's very meaningful to people, as are the people in Darth Vader's orbit, whether it's Padme or Luke or Han or any of them. And so when you are given the opportunity to write stories about these people, you know, people don't see Star Wars as a bunch of stories. I mean, some do, but many people see it as actual history and actual mythology. And so when you are being asked to write a new chapter in any of it, I think that there's a responsibility to try to, you know, at least when I'm trying to make sure that whatever I'm adding to the universe is in theory and hypothetically is as good as what the things that got me into it in the first place. And while that's kind of an impossible target to hit, you know, it's like a Death Star exhaust port. You have to aim for something, because otherwise it's sort of like, why? Like, I don't want to half-ass something that I love this much and that other people around the world love this much. Like, that should be my target, even if it's sort of impossible to hit. That's what I like to try to do. And it's kind of, you know, speaking of like Light of the Jedi, which is a High Republic book that's coming out in January, Star Wars book I'm writing now, other Star Wars things I'm doing. You know, the Star Wars book that Greg's doing Darth Vader, I'm doing Star Wars with, are both set right after Empire Strikes Back, which is a time when a lot of characters are going through very, very dark times in their lives, and they're trying to deal with it, trying to find the path forward, trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And Light of the Jedi begins in a time where things are really good, and people start to kind of see a change in that. You know, not cracks in the facade. It's more just sort of an external thing happening, but people have to reevaluate the way their lives are. And I think that's all really resonant. Like the best Star Wars, you know, it has these themes that keep coming around and around, generation after generation. Like, you know, my daughter likes Star Wars, my dad likes Star Wars, I like Star Wars. You know, the themes resonate because they're true no matter your age and no matter when you're coming to them, because there's always darkness and there's always light.
And what about for, you know, Katie, Michael, and Greg? Is there an intimidation? You know, with Katie, you've got that other vantage point as well of illustrating these iconic designs that have been passed down from, you know, your Joe Johnstons, and they get to your Doug Chang and everybody that has contributed visually to Star Wars, but also for Michael and Greg in writing, whoever wants to take it first. Is it sort of like always considering the whole, or do you really just have to sometimes push it out and say, this is my take?
For me, I'm extremely lucky that I have been doing stuff for Star Wars for basically over 10 years at this point. Like since before the Disney purchase, I worked on the web comics that went along with the Clone Wars cartoon and did a bunch of stuff for Scholastic. And then they brought me back on after the Disney purchase. Really because, and the story was, they had someone in-house and they had given them a bunch of my old artwork and they said, "Hi, can you copy Katie's style?" And her sense of humor that she puts into the Star Wars universe. And apparently they just didn't get it right. So I got hired back on to do some contract stuff. And so when I get to do something for Star Wars, they're expecting something that's Katie Cook's little corner of the galaxy, whether it be the cuteness of one of the Star Wars kids books, the comics that I've written. They are expecting them to be fun and zany and a little weird. And especially the one that I just turned in, which is the grossest facts of the Star Wars world.
I can't wait.
Asked me to just go nuts and make stuff up. I mean, I have an illustration in there of a Jawa flashing Luke. One of the questions that they wrote was like, what do Jawas wear under their robes? And so I just wrote, "You don't want to know."
It's fantastic.
So I'm very lucky that, you know, Disney and Lucasfilm trust me to do what I want with these characters. And thus far, only one thing I've ever sent in was like, "No, absolutely not. You can't do this." And I'm not going to say what it is because one day I'm going to make it work.
And now it sits in your desk with a glow. You look at it every day. Like, this will happen.
Story group at least once every 4 months.
It's fantastic. And then what about you, Michael, with sort of the not the pressure, but just the interesting perspective that your stories are sort of, along with Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, the furthest down the timeline, where it's not like building based on what comes after and before, but you're sort of making a lot of new material. You're touching on uncharted territory. What is that like for you?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. You know, I've worked mainly in two eras: the prequel era with the Clone Wars series that I did that just finished up, and now the sequel era, which is the relaunch of the Star Wars Adventures line, even prior to that. And I think all of it is intimidating, and all of it's kind of I don't want to say nerve-wracking, but it is intimidating for sure. And the reason it's intimidating, at least to me, is because I'm someone who loves Star Wars so much. I love it. I've loved it since I was 4 years old, you know, and knowing that love and knowing how important and how vital it is to me. And Charles is right. This is kind of the mythology of our time. You know, a lot of people can argue, and I think it's a good argument. And knowing how important it is, how vital the story it is to people, the intimidation factor comes from me just wanting to get it right. You know, wanting to get those things in my stories that feel like Star Wars. You know, I want, while Star Wars Adventures, I've always written for kids. You know, one can make a compelling case that Star Wars is for kids in many, many ways. But these are, you know, strictly targeted for children. There is still a need to make this feel like a Star Wars story, the Star Wars that they know, watching, you know, Rey and, you know, Luke, or, you know, Captain Rex or whoever, you know. And specifically to your point about the new trilogy, it's pretty exciting. It's very, very, very exciting, as a matter of fact, to like be able to contribute to this burgeoning mythology. You know, while those three movies are done, we've reached the conclusion in that sense. I still think there's a lot of stories to be told with this cast, Rey or Rose or, you know, whomever, Poe. And I think that like we'll see that live on still in novels and comics. Maybe it'll go beyond where episode 9 ends. I hope so. But I think there's still so many stories to tell. And that's the wonderful thing that we've all discovered as Star Wars has existed for so long, is that there are stories, foundational stories that exist in the film, but then there are so many other stories and so many other characters and places and things to explore beyond that. And with the sequel trilogy, we've only just scratched the surface.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I want to jump to Charles and Greg real quick, just because of their their mutual work on the character of Vader in two different eras. And it's interesting. You know, I'm about to reveal how much of a baby I am. I was 6 years old watching Attack of the Clones in the theater. And so that era, that era sort of built me in a lot of ways and was so formative to who I am. So it's amazing when you see, you know, what Charles and Greg, what you guys have done with Vader, which is the iconography that's existed since the 70s, but you're throwing in the flavor of, you know, the prequel trilogy with Sabe. You're throwing in the flavor of Star Wars Rebels in your books with, you know, the Temple Guard saber and things like that we've also seen in Clone Wars. So what is it like to unify the eras in a way that's sort of unique to comics? I would say comics have that advantage where, you know, someone like a J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, they could throw in references, but they can't like, let's segue and bring this character back. You can't just do that in 2 hours, where you have that freedom to say, no, we can validate it all and really tie it together. So whoever wants to jump in.
I mean, well, first of all, I apologize for jumping in and out. My internet hopefully is fixed, and I'll be able to sort of stick with it from now on. But
it's just your dark energy, Charles. That's all it is.
Yes, so my Sith energy coming through, disrupting the feed. So, you know, one thing that is nice about Darth Vader is that he really does tie through, you know, from the prequels all the way through to the sequel trilogy. His presence is very much felt. He influences other people's actions. He takes a lot of actions himself, and so he touches almost every major character in all of those trilogies in one way or another. And so I think he's a very rich and dense character, which is why, you know, Greg's series, which is set right after Empire Strikes Back, my series, which was set right after Episode 3, and then Kieran Gillen's series, which kicked off the Darth Vader books at Marvel, was set between A New Hope and Empire. And all of those points in Vader's timeline were able to tease out these really fascinating stories, because he is a character that, while you think of him as kind of this monolithic, dark force of evil who was always sort of the same, just murders people, like Jason, he's not like that at all. And I think part of the testament to that is the way the prequels developed him, but also, you know, the fact that he has a real, like, where he starts is not where he ends, which is a really neat thing. And in terms of the question you actually asked about how we're using kind of the tapestry of Star Wars to make all of the stories richer, I think Star Wars is a huge toolkit, and one of the things that's great about it is that there are characters like Mace Windu is somebody from the prequels who is extremely impactful, and his presence is felt, again, in some ways all the way to the sequel trilogy. Like, you know, you can see the things that he did, how maybe they impacted Luke in a way. And so using a reference to him, or any prequel character, or any sequel character, whatever, like there are characters from every era of Star Wars that are impactful to people. And each one of them is a storytelling tool that we can sort of draw and use and put into the stories whenever we want to kind of use our writing skills and art skills to kind of get the most impact possible. And it's really nice to have the roster be that, the bench be that deep in terms of the characters we can use.
Absolutely. And what about for you, Greg? What do you think about sort of what you've brought in? I mean, every single time an issue of your Vader run comes out, you jump onto Twitter and it's just people weeping about, you know, seeing how much soul and connectivity there's been from, you know, Phantom Menace all the way down to what is an original trilogy era, but it's really become sort of a story of scars about, you know, him still dealing with things when he seems his coldest.
We've been incredibly lucky with this book that Lucasfilm they opened up doors. You know, they let us dig. I mean, I work best when I have big fun genres to play with, but a real emotional story as well. You know, like that's what I do. So if I've got an emotional story that I really dig into, that's when I'm happiest, and that's when I do my best work. They said yes, go express. You know, like we look at the end of Empire, and you know, I mean, I'm Gen X, so I saw that movie in theaters when I was a kid, and all our minds were blown with the big revelation, and it's easy, even decades later, to only think of that moment from Luke's point, because it's such a huge moment. It's like your father, Darth Vader, and then Darth Vader invites you to join the dark side, and you say no, and you drop down to the big pits underneath, or that big chasm underneath Cloud Sea, instead of join your father. It's this enormous moment, and as a kid, you're watching it and you're identifying with Luke. I'm a little older now, and so it's kind of awesome to go back in there and think about that from Vader's point of view, and that moment is just as traumatizing for Vader as it is for Luke. And Vader goes through an incredible unseen journey from the end of Empire when he's saying, "Join with me, my son. I sent force in you. Join with me. Together we'll overthrow the Emperor and we'll bring order to the galaxy. You, me, it's us." And then at the beginning of Return, he's back to calling the Emperor Master and is just dutifully trying to bring Luke to the Emperor. So there's something that happens there, right? And we're given this enormous gift, and Lucasfilm gets the green light to explore that story from Vader's point of view, and that's the huge challenge. I mean, Vader was, for my generation, Vader was the movie villain. Yeah, like I'm hands down. No villain was more powerful, had a powerful. Charles talks about iconography and the imagery. That silhouette of Vader, everything about Vader was movie villain, right? I think the character has been developed and fascinating over the years. Like the prequels. I was an original trilogy kid. I was a prequels kid. And so in taking on, when I started working on Star Wars, I had to go back and really watch those prequels again and again and think about them. And there's incredible work being done on developing Vader's character, and some really, just even, and it's so they're really conscious, smart, aesthetically powerful decisions being made down to just like for framing, and paralleling moments with like there's I just the other day I was noticing this. There's when in Empire, when Luke confronts her, in Cloud City, Luke goes to find Vader finally, and he confronts them in the chamber where Han was carbonized. And the framing, Vader standing up on this platform is kind of looking up towards him. It's the same angle as the framing at the end of Revenge of the Sith, when the famous "I have the high ground." It's the same framing, only it's Obi-Wan up above where Vader is later, and Luke in Anakin's spot. Like those kinds of choices. I maybe that's coincidence, but it feels intentional, and it feels like there are all of these parallels going throughout between the arcs of these different characters and seeing the way they make choices at different moments, and it's just so having a chance to dig into that, play with all that, and to kind of look at this whole scope and draw those threads, there's tons of stuff, and we've had this amazing opportunity in the Vader book to dig deep into that and really explore Vader's inner light, which it was something I was really kind of concerned about, like in comics all the time you have little caption boxes, with characters' inner voices, and you can't have Vader saying, well, that weird. You know what I mean? Like you have to find a special way to do that. And what I pitched was, you can see.
Hey, Greg, I just want to say, like, your audio is like, like.
Oh shoot!
Really, this whole time it's been like, Vader, which is fine. I just want you to know that's how it's coming across on the stream.
That is unfortunate. Well, let me pause for 1 second and just so I can switch to a different mic. How's that? Does that work better?
Oh my God!
It does.
It works.
Well, I blame the fancy mic.
I wish I had said something 5 minutes ago.
That's all right. Okay. It was,
We wouldn't have got the person in the comments saying he sounds like Max Headroom.
You were just on such a roll that we were piecing it together.
Oh,
but the soul of the answers were still there. But please continue.
But no, I was just going to say that it presents really cool challenges, and I wanted to. This kind of links back to your original question of like, are you intimidated taking on these kinds of jobs? And I mean, yes, obviously, but no, because you can't be. You know, like if you want to do the job right, you can't write out of fear. You know, you have to write out of joy and out of excitement and hope. You know what I mean? Like you have to bring you have to believe that you were hired for a reason, and trust that your voice matters, and bring bring what you got, bring your best, you know? So that's what that's what I try to do every time. And so I mean, I think that a word though that I would throw in there is respect. Like you have to have respect for the source material, you know, and and I think that's one of the things that I've been happy about. I mean, I love this Vader book. I love working with Rafienko and Niraj Menon, the artist and the colorist, and Joe Caramagna, who's the letterer, and editors Mark Panici and Tom Groneman. Like it's an amazing team, and everybody is just bringing everything they can to make this book sing. But the oh shoot, I just lost what I was saying. Respect. One of the things that I love about this book is that we've been able to dig into the prequels and find those, we have given those moments in the prequels the respect they earned and deserve. I think, you know what I mean? And we're not, and it's been incredibly gratifying seeing fan response to that too. I mean, folks have really dug deep with us. They love, like we brought back the Handmaidens and Sabe, and because all that material, just like Charles said, that material is so rich. There's so many threads just waiting. And with any kind of licensed material, the fear is that you won't be able to write a story that matters, right? That the stories that matter are being saved for the movies or for something else, right? But this material is so deep, and I feel like the folks at Lucasfilm care so much, and they want every story to matter, and so they've opened these doors for us. I mean, I had no idea we'd be able to explore this stuff. It hasn't been explored in the movies. It hasn't been explored in bigger media. We're doing it right here. It's incredibly gratifying.
Because I think that one of the things, just to speak to what you're saying, is that Star Wars is so deep and rich that like it can be approached from many different angles. So the way that Katie is approaching it with her books is not the way that Michael's approaching it with Star Wars Adventures, the way that you and I are doing with or even like the Mandalorian, right? Like there's it's myth. Like I said before, I feel like it's mythology and it's history, and it's just like Greek myths, Erroneous. You can tell those stories in many different ways to hit many different audiences and connect with people in many different ways, and it's fantastic. It is modern myth, whatever you want to say, and it's really a privilege to be able to make new parts of it, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, one moment just for you, Charles, that in your Vader run, repurposing the "Are you an angel?" I mean, that moment haunts me. Like it legitimately, now watching Phantom Menace, it changes because the tapestry affects things forward, backwards, in the narrative level, on the meta level. How you watch something like Mandalorian, and I mean, right over here. You got, the Darksaber. We're ready for this week. We're ready. People love that stuff of the respect that Greg's speaking to. So I want to start with Katie and sort of go around the room here, the digital room, and talk about sort of the George of it all, and in terms of that respect, and how he's telling the World War II story, the samurai story, the Western story, all that stuff. When you're drawing or writing, or just breaking a story in a room, are you thinking in terms of, okay, the Western trope that I want to put in here? Are you trying to think back to the elements, the actual recipe? Or
this is a weird question for me, because I think I get hired for a complete lack of respect. Like I did a backstory that the only reason that Dengar looks the way he does is he went into a room full of bounty hunters that all had cooler costumes than him. So he went into a bathroom and put toilet paper over his head to try and make himself look cooler.
Oh man.
And that's canon, my
Is that
friends. And that's canon.
Or like the Star Wars gross book. I had to like write a page and illustrate about how Jabba the Hutt takes a bath.
You know, any number of words could have come after "takes right there. So,
Yeah.
And so I have like an elaborate pulley system of just Salacious Crumb, like lowering him into a bathtub that looks exactly like his throne. So it's I'm just having fun with what I've got, and I try and use the source material so it's heavily referenced and true to the heart of the fun part of Star Wars.
Mhm.
But for me, nothing is off limits. Like I will draw Ponda Boba cradling his arm like a little baby, going like, "Well, it's not the worst thing that happened today."
But yeah, the funny thing, Katie, though, is that is respect, because that is because Star Wars is goofy. You know what I mean? It's like they named the people who look like squid the Mon Calamari. You know what I mean? Like that's ludicrous.
And I have Akbar in the book eating sushi with another Mon Calamari. Like, what are you doing?
It's fantastic.
The thing is, guys, the real truth of that is that Star Wars happened a long, long time ago. So in fact, squid and calamari and all that are named after that species.
That's also canon.
There you go. No pride.
That's also
Charles
canon.
Soule. There you go.
It's got like such an inherent cheese that I love that you touched on, you know, Katie and Greg, that I talk about it all the time. Like this man, George Lucas, that we all, you know, we're talking about his baby here. He had Darth Maul's brother and they were like, "What do we call him, George?" He said, "I don't know, Savage." We'll say Savage. Like, yeah. So Michael, let have you jump in here, sort of for that same sort of realm of, you know, how much of it is you know, I have to do the Western, I have to do the journey, I have to be the Campbellian, but also like this is kind of dorky.
Yeah, I mean, well, when you're up against the Vajjo press, I mean, it's hard to, where do you go, you know? But no, you know, there is like, you can pick and choose like so many different, you know, things in the cocktail of what Star Wars is. But ultimately, you know, especially for writing for the audience that I do, for younger readers, you know, my target is to keep it simple, you know, is to do the things that Star Wars does best, which is to instruct us of important lessons of, you know, how to be a good friend, how to be a good citizen, how to be a good ally, you know, how to convey important, simple lessons that thankfully the Star Wars canvas and the characters and the conflicts are able to convey so well. And I figure if I'm able to do that and put it into the context of what Star Wars is, then I'm kind of doing what I'm supposed to be doing and making it fun. You know, you can get kind of lost in that minutia of like, you know, like you said, you know, there is like the samurai, there is the World War II, there is, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There are all these things going on. But like ultimately, like I said, especially for my audience, I think for any audience, really, it's just about keeping it simple and telling a really good, effective story that feels like Star Wars.
Absolutely. So for everybody here, I'm curious, you know, that we've sort of dissected these themes and your perspectives, your mentalities. We've dissected the fact that Katie Cook has something that gets struck down once every 4 months, but we'll see it eventually. I'm curious, what is the thing that you haven't tackled yet? And of course, I'm not privy to things to emails that things might be in the works, but is there a character? I mean, Charles writes 1,000 things a day. It feels like the greatest time management expert of our time. Every single time that there's a new Star Wars announcement, I know us fans get really excited. Like, yes, this is finally getting its due, or yes, this time period is finally happening. Is there somebody that you want to get a hold of? I mean, Charles mentioned Mandalorian, and there's things like that where we know that that's going to inch its way into publishing, or is it maybe you know, something else from the High Republic or anything like that you're like, ooh, I would love to do that. Like Katie can grab the High Republic characters and disrespect them too, which would be amazing.
Let's finally make it canon that Baby Yoda goes to McDonald's and gets chicken nuggets.
Yes.
Well, that's you know, that's a tough one, because I tend not to want to answer these questions because you don't want to jinx your opportunities. I will say that one of the biggest characters that I have wanted to get a hold of is it's gonna happen, and I'll say no more.
Ooh, you heard it here. Elon Sleaze Bogano coming to the Darth Vader series. It's happening.
It's gonna be boring. You changed his life. Remember?
Yeah.
I'd love to do something silly with Darth Vader that's like his coping mechanism for how terrible his life is that like when the maw of his giant like cage opens, there's like 4 cat trees in it, and he's adopted like 30 loth cats. He's just sitting there in a pink bathrobe.
He's doing the Marlon Brando thing from The Godfather.
Like,
Yes.
just a little blonde cat toy, and was like, this is how I'm dealing with things right now.
That's fantastic. What about you, Charles and Michael?
Michael, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. Similar to Greg, there's something that I just pitched that I was pretty shocked that they said yes to. That's a series that is starting next year. But I was very surprised, especially the manner in which I pitched it. It's pretty absurd, but it's gonna be fun. But yeah, I mean, other than that, my big pipe dream, which is not going to happen, but nonetheless, I would love to, in some fashion, and I've spoke about this publicly a lot, but I'd love to continue Solo. And the reason being is because it's such a movie that tragically didn't perform as well as it should have. It's such a great movie. It's such a movie that, I think for me, and I think for a lot of people would agree maybe that like the peak of Star Wars, everyone's favorite, everyone's, Empire is the question you'll probably get most often. I would safely assume. And the reason to me is that I combined these great elements. It was funny and had such great adventure, and it was romantic, and it was just this sweeping epic. And I feel like Solo is the closest thing to Empire that's been, especially at least in film. And it left a wonderful door open to continue that story. And I would love to see the possibilities of where it can go. Maybe we will. I mean, who knows? I don't know that I would be the one to do it, but maybe we will, and I would be so satisfied to see where that goes, from judging by where it ended.
Absolutely, and lastly, with Charles on this question.
Well, I'm in an interesting place because I've been very, very, very fortunate in my Star Wars work that I've been able to write everybody that I've wanted to write, I've pretty much gotten to write at this point, and not just like small moments, like big stories with them. Whether it's Palpatine was my original sort of absolutely wanted to, and now I'm getting to do a ton of Luke, and even Han's popping up, sort of like it's I've been really, really lucky that I've touched on pretty much everybody at one time or another. So the way I would sort of think about it now is how fortunate I feel to be working in the High Republic, which is this era that is specifically designed to build a lot of new characters that hopefully will be connected to in the same way that the existing set of characters have been. So for me, like, and my co-authors in the High Republic, Justina Ireland, Claudia Gray, Daniel Jose Older, and Kevin Scott, we're all trying to build this new section of Star Wars. It's set about 200 years before The Phantom Menace, for people who don't know. And it starts in January 5th with my novel, Light of the Jedi. But it feels very different because we're trying to take everything we love about Star Wars, but also make it fresh and new and different with new characters you don't know. I mean, some might be connected to people you've seen before, or there might be some, 200 years in a galaxy where some creatures live 1,000, some beings live 1,000 years or more. You can have some people pop up, but it's just it's very invigorating to be trying to take Star Wars, break it apart, rebuild it, reconfigure it for kind of a new generation. And you can drop in all kinds of things there's been concept art that's been released of how the lightsabers are different.
Mm-hmm.
They're not that, they're still lightsabers, but they have, they look almost more Arthurian or like knights. They have cross guards, so we know Kylo Ren had that, but they, the Jedi have cross guard sabers, among other things. There's many, many things that we're doing to try and make this era feel distinct. And you can do things within it that are within the era that are just, they're new in a way that it's difficult to pull off if you're writing a story set in the original trilogy. I mean, we're not going to do like, robot wars or anything like that, but it's still a way for us to do some really interesting new things. So for me, in terms of the things I want to get my hands on, it's very much the High Republic stuff right now, even though I already kind of do have my hands on it.
Right. And there's a question here from Tevya Smolka here that says, speaking of Star Wars reminds me, are you going to be covering the Old Republic? The High is obviously 200 years before Phantom Menace, like you said. Is there a sense in the High Republic that you can tease that there has been, even more history behind that? Star Wars always has that sort of in medias res thing. So are these Arthurian Jedi going to say, well, back then when he was even older?
I think that Star Wars is always kind of an endless timeline. There's always more that's going to happen in the far future, and there's always more that happened in the far past. So the High Republic is very much a distinct time. It has its own identity. It is Camelot in both the sort of Arthurian sense, but also the kind of 1960s America, time of possibility in many ways. It was a very complicated time in America, but and so so that is that era, and it means something specific within the Star Wars overarching timeline. But certainly there was a lot of Star Wars before that, and certainly there's a lot of Star Wars after that.
We have another question here just for the group and everybody in terms of creating villains, what ask. Is it more fun to write villains because you can get away with more stuff, especially in the realm of comics, versus than in films? I mean, we have the Jabba Bath story already, so that's a villain story that I love, but everybody here has gotten to explore the villains in some way. So whoever wants to jump in and take that first.
Just a quick one is that the hero always has to be the hero, but the villain can be a lot of other things. He can have a little bit more depth. He can have his layers of the onion. So usually villains are always a little bit more fun to write.
Yeah, it's funny. The question comes up a lot. I mean, I think that for dramatic purposes, it's often very fun to have characters who behave badly, whether they're villains or not. Like characters like, I mean, one of the reasons The Mandalorian is so fun is because you've got this kind of this character who's a bounty hunter and who's kind of rough and tumble, and you don't quite know what he's going to do. Of course, fairly quickly you realize he's got a heart of gold, et cetera, et cetera. But that whole, I mean, we like watching characters misbehave. And then, learning from it or what, over time, sometimes not. But as somebody's writing Vader, it's incredibly fun. Just like when you're writing the Hulk, when the Hulk or Vader cuts loose, very often characters like this, even if they are in ostensibly the villain role, when they cut loose, they are often cutting loose against people who kind of deserve it. And so that's there's an interesting sort of wish fulfillment about that, which is fun as both a writer and I think as a reader. At the same time, I mean, I'm a sucker for lawful good characters as well. I loved writing Luke, and I loved writing Superman when I was writing Superman. There's something about characters who are really doing their best to do the right thing at every given moment in time. I mean, struggling with that, and I think that's those kind of stories can be incredibly compelling and a lot of fun as well. So, but Vader has been ridiculously fun to write. I mean, it's interesting though, because Vader is not. I mean, writing Vader is not like writing Palpatine. You know what I mean? Like Vader. I mean, Vader is the classic example people might point to when you say that every villain, like the more complex a villain gets, the more interesting they become. Vader is the protagonist of the Star Wars saga. I mean, that you were talking about like Lucas's influence or legacy. I mean, I think at some point Lucas talked about those first 6 movies being the tragedy of Darth Vader. Like that's the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. Like that's the through line. So Vader's not just a typical villain. I mean, so you kind of get your cake and eat it too, right? Because you can have, bad misbehaving Vader as well as soul searching Vader. You know what I mean? Or Vader losing his soul and trying, and possibly regaining it or not, at different points. Like there's a lot of stuff to play with there.
That's awesome. There was a question here from Ed. I want to throw it to Michael and Charles about sort of bringing attention to these books. How can we cross promote your books to the eyes viewing the films and streaming with Mandalorian and Clone Wars, things like that? A lot of the times it's a Star Wars fan thing to say, oh, but there's these amazing things happening in comics. There's amazing things happening for young readers. There's amazing things happening in novels. how do you think that we can have sort of those conversations to say like, hey, if you love the Force lore, check out Light of the Jedi. Hey, if you love the sequel characters, check out Adventures. Like, what do you think those conversations are like to sort of championing print?
You want to go, Michael?
Charles, why don't you?
Okay.
You go ahead. I'm formulating.
There's a real valuable role in the sort of the fan evangelist for the sort of the deeper parts of Star Wars canon. And honestly, publishing isn't really like, it's not that deep. I mean, you know, there are weirder corners of Star Wars that are harder to find than the books and comics. And I think that what the books and comics do really well is they take the characters that you love that have cool bits, but they don't get to be explored. And so whether it is Mace Windu, who I mentioned earlier, whether it's I mean, Poe Dameron, right? Poe Dameron's in the movies, and he's a big part of those movies, but he also has I forget how many he did, like a 33 or 36 issue Marvel series. I think it was 33. That really digs into his time as the leader of Black Squadron and working in the New Republic and trying to deal with, you know, the First Order and all that stuff. And so you get this kind of like additional movie. Like if you like the experience of the movies, the comics, the books, the games, all these things can kind of expand it out. So I see somebody here just Broaxium just said in the chat, the comics are so important, they're the connective tissue of the Star Wars saga. I think that's true. Because as you mentioned earlier, comics can draw from all these different eras and stitch everything together to really make it feel like it is not a movie and then another movie and then another movie and then maybe a TV show. It's this endless tapestry of storytelling that is all pretty damn rich. So how do you get people to check those things out? I think people who find it just need to tell other Star Wars fans. And you're not going to get everybody on board or involved, but like if you find something you love, whether it's Greg's Vader book or Katie's stories or Michael's or any of our work, and you know your friends like Star Wars, but they aren't reading it, you just sort of put it out there. You can use Twitter, you can use whatever, something you love, try to tell other people that you love it. That's the main thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great answer. And I think another thing to point out is that like you can do it with, I think, easily removing the intimidation factor, which often comes with comics or any tie-in materials. I've never written a Star Wars comic, nor have I ever read a Star Wars comic or book for that matter, where I felt lost. I've read everyone on this panel. I've read everyone's work, and I've never felt intimidated or lost by what I was reading, or felt that I needed to know a whole lot more before I was able to get what was going on. And I think that's something that we're all very important about, and Lucasfilm is very important to them as well. Is that maintaining that like their accessibility. You can read this stuff, you can read any of the novels, and I don't feel like there's a tremendous gateway to like if you picked up whatever Batman in the middle of a run. It's a very different very different stuff. So I think that like demystifying it and saying like, hey, you can pick up a trade of one of these books. It should be the first in the volume, it should be the first volume, don't start at 3, but like you could pick it up, and I think you can hit the ground running and understand very clearly what's going on and get a tremendous amount of value of the Star Wars mythology from it.
Absolutely. It's wonderful answers. And again, it's so important for everybody watching to champion these things. Like Broaxium said, the connective tissue, those moments where suddenly everything clicks. I mean, I hope that Michael, you get to tackle, the Solo realm, because that was the first instance of film sort of saying all of this matters. And animated series fans lost it when Maul popped up. And that type of stuff happens all the time in comics. We got to wind down here in just a second, but I want to ask you guys to go around the room. George always says, this is for 12-year-olds. This is, the choices. It's those original things. If we can get 12-year-old Katie, 12-year-old Michael, 12-year-old Greg, and 12-year-old Charles on the line and ask, and tell them, that you would be creating Star Wars, what do you think that they would say? And do you think that you would have sort of fulfilled their wishes? For like what Katie at 12 had said, you better draw this, and that's my dream. How do you think that conversation would go?
The only thing I've ever said to anybody since I was 6 years old when they say, what do you want to be when you grow up, is I say, I want to be a cartoonist. So the fact that not only do I have my own properties I've gotten to work on Star Wars. I've gotten to work in Marvel. I've gotten to work at DC. I've gotten to work at Disney. I've gotten to work at the Jim Henson Company and a whole slew of other companies. So, like 6-year-old Katie is living her dream. It's so I'm very fortunate and very lucky that this is my job. It's amazing.
Whoever wants to jump in, Greg.
Yeah, I've wanted to be a writer since I was about 9 or 10. Ray Bradbury was my big hero. I remember finding out that Ray Bradbury was born on August 22nd, and I was born on August 23rd. Many years separated us, but I was like, oh, I wonder if that means something. I mean, so I think 12-year-old me would be thrilled to see what I'm doing. 12-year-old me would probably be a bit of a snob, though. 12-year-old me was like, well, why haven't you written any more novels? You've only written one novel. You've written 500 comics. That's great, but why not more novels? No, I mean, it is funny. There is something funny about, years later, I am immersed in the stuff that I loved when I was a kid. I mean, that is a weird situation to be in, but I think the kind of beautiful thing, though, is that, as I've gotten older, there are different aspects of the stories that resonate with me at different times. I remember somebody saying that, talking about great literature, and that when you're a kid, you can read Moby Dick and it's just an adventure story. Later on, you read it and it's a totally different story. Like every story can resonate. Every good story can resonate on multiple levels, and so it's been it's kind of awesome that to have that experience. So yeah, I hope I'm not. I think 12-year-old me was probably more of probably a little bit more of a continuity snob than I am now. So so he probably has.
There's a lot less continuity when you were 12 than there is.
Yes, that is
easier
true.
to be one.
He probably has some notes for me, which I would take under advisement and then proceed.
The 12-year-old development executive.
Yes, exactly.
And then for Charles and Michael.
I think for me, really, like, there's nothing that would have made, like, literally almost nothing that would have made 12-year-old me happier than to know that I was going to be writing stories for Luke Skywalker, that I was going to be writing stories about Darth Vader, that I was going to be involved in stories for episodes 7, 8, and 9, like, I mean, ancillary, but nevertheless. And like, I would, because at that time, episodes 7, 8, and 9 were like just this rumored thing. And I don't know, like 12-year-old me would have lost his shit. Just to be, that's what would have happened.
I mean, you wrote the son of Han and Leia. Like, that's like.
Yeah, he would not have recovered for a long, long time if you told him that this was going to be happening.
Would he have written critical letters to the editor, though, Charles? Would he have had issues?
I think he mostly would have been frustrated at how long it was going to take for that to happen. Like how much of a gap there would be between 12-year-old Charles and when those was going to happen. But I don't know. This is the best. This is just working in Star Wars is and remains just the best thing. I love it.
Well, guys, I hate to do this. I swear I blinked and the hour was gone. That's how amazing this panel has been, guys. The chat room, my apologies. We tried to get to as many questions as we could, but this was just an absolute delight. And Alden, can't thank you enough for coming on, hosting this amazing panel. This was an absolute blast. I'm curious, Greg, if something fell in the background. I heard this shattering sound.
Oh, yeah, it was a little bowl with almonds in it because
almond bowl.
I'm eating healthy. Every day.
Good man. Carbo load whenever doing these virtual panels. It's always a good
thing. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you to everybody, Katie, Charles, Greg, Michael, for giving me hope in these times, for adding to the thing that I love the most, for giving that to kids, and for destroying my paycheck. Thank you for that as well.
And thanks again to everybody who's watching and everybody who's buying the books. Seriously, you are literally the best in this unbelievable time. I mean, the support is incredibly appreciated, and we love you.
And the stores need you right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. So head on over to your local comic book shop, pick up all these amazing Star Wars books. All of them are just as good, if not better than the last. So we're gonna take about a 60-second break here before we bring on our next guest, Mr. John Campia. So thanks a lot, guys. We'll be back here in just a second.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye.